Colorado Territory, spring of 1872. The wind cut sharp off the Sangre de Cristo Mountains as Delaney Sutton stood on the porch of her father's ranch house. Her arms folded tight across her chest, trying not to cry in front of her family again. "Plain as dry toast," her older sister murmured just loud enough for their mother to hear. Their mother did not scold her. She just sighed the same way she always did when she looked at Delaney. That sigh had weight. It said, "You will never be enough. Best you get back inside, Delaney," her father said without turning from the corral fence where he and her brother were watching a new gelding get broken. "You are only in the way out here." Delaney's throat burned. She stepped backward into the house, heart beating hard against her ribs. She was 24, unmarried, and not a single man had come calling, not even once. Her sisters were all married, prettier, louder, with gold-burnished hair and bright eyes that drew everyone in. Delaney's hair was soft brown, her eyes a quiet gray. She was slender and strong from work, but nothing about her caught the eye. She had not expected much, but still, it stung. She slipped out of the ranch house that night with her journal tucked beneath her shawl, heading for the old cottonwood that leaned over the creek out back. It was the only place she could breathe. She did not expect to find someone already there, crouched by the water, washing blood off his hands. She froze. The man looked up fast. Tall, lean, maybe 30, with a sharp jaw and a bandana tied around his arm to stop the bleeding. His clothes were trail-worn, dust caked on his shoulders. A rifle lay beside him. But it was his eyes that held her still clear blue and not afraid. "Sorry," he said. "I did not mean to scare you. You are bleeding," Delaney said, voice rough from disuse. "I ran into some trouble a few miles south, just needed a minute to clean up." She glanced at his arm. "You need it stitched." "I am used to patching myself up." "You will do it wrong." He lifted an eyebrow. She stepped forward, heart pounding. "I have thread and a needle inside. I can help." He hesitated. "You sure?" No one ever asked her anything. She nodded. By the time they were seated by the fire pit, the man had given her his name, Orin Easton. He was a cattleman, passing through on his way north from Santa Fe. He had been ambushed by horse thieves near Trinidad and lost 2 of his stock. He had kept the rest, but not without a fight. "This land gets meaner every year," he said as she stitched him up steady-handed. "You are lucky they did not kill you. They tried." He winced as she tied the knot and cut the thread. Her fingers brushed his skin and she pulled back quickly. "Thank you," he said. "You did better than any doctor I have met." Delaney shook her head. "I am not a doctor. I just help the ranch hands when they get hurt. You always this quiet?" "Only when I am awake." That made him laugh. Delaney looked away, embarrassed. "You live at that ranch," she nodded. "You do not look like them." Her stomach twisted. "Because I am plain." He studied her, face serious now. "I never said that. You do not have to." "I meant it as a compliment," he said. "You do not look like you are trying to be someone you are not." She blinked, unsure what to say. He stood slowly, flexing his arm. "I will be heading out at first light. Got to make up for lost time." Delaney nodded, disappointed in a way she did not understand. "Thank you again," he said, "for the stitches and the company." She watched him disappear into the trees. 3 days passed. She thought about him more than she should. She told herself it was because he had been kind, not because of how he had looked at her like she was worth seeing. Then on the 4th morning she found him again, this time slumped against the cottonwood, pale, fevered, with his horse tied loosely beside him. He had come back. "Orin," she knelt beside him, touching his face. He was burning up. "I tried to ride on," he muttered, "but the wound." "You are infected." She hauled him up with all her strength, got him on his horse, and led him back to the barn, hiding him in the hay loft where no one in her family would find him. She cleaned the wound again, put cool cloths on his head, fed him water slowly with a spoon. "You came back," she whispered once, not expecting an answer, but his hand caught hers weakly. "I could not stop thinking about you." Her throat tightened. His fever broke that night. She fell asleep in the loft beside him, unnoticed by the world but seen fully by the only man who mattered. When she woke, he was looking at her, really looking. "You stayed," he said. "You needed someone." His hand found hers again, warmer now, stronger. I needed you. Delaney had never been needed by anyone. She smiled through tears. Then stay, please. Orin nodded, eyes steady. I will. And for the first time in her life, Delaney Sutton felt beautiful, not because of what she wore, not because of what anyone else thought, but because someone had seen her, truly seen her, and come back anyway. The loft was quieter than the house ever was. Dust floated in narrow beams of morning sun. Orin lay back on the pallet she'd made of saddle blankets and old quilts, one arm across his stomach, his breath deeper now. Delaney sat near the open hatch, her knees drawn close beneath her skirt, watching the breeze stir the tall grass beyond the barn doors. You don't speak much when you're thinking, Orin said faintly. She looked over. Didn't know I was being watched. You weren't. Just noticed the quiet deepened. Delaney reached for the tin cup beside her and held it out. Drink more. You need it. He sat up slowly, careful of his side, and took the water. You're good at reading what folks need before they ask. She tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. I've had practice. Orin drank, then passed the cup back. You always hide out here when the house gets too loud. I don't remember telling you it was loud. You didn't. But you don't sit in a barn like this unless you're trying to hear yourself think. Delaney set the cup aside. You talk like someone who's been alone a lot. He leaned back again, his gaze drifting across the rafters. I've ridden cattle up through Kansas, broke horses down near Las Cruces, hauled freight once through Indian Territory in winter, alone most of that time. You learn to listen in the quiet, she hesitated. You ever miss having someone to talk to? Orin didn't answer right away. Sometimes, but most folks don't talk, they just fill the air. Delaney's lips curved slightly. That why you rode back here instead of heading on? I rode back because I wanted to see you again. Color touched her cheeks, but she didn't look away. Orin's voice was low. I thought maybe you'd be glad I came back. I was. She traced the worn edge of the quilt. But I didn't know what to do with that feeling. You don't have to do anything with it, he said. Just let it be. They were quiet for a moment, the sound of birds nesting in the rafters above them. Delaney glanced down at her hands. My family thinks something's wrong with me. They wouldn't say it plain, but it's in the way they pause, the way they leave me off to the side like I've already settled for less. Orin's brow furrowed. They don't know you. They've had their whole lives to try. He shifted, wincing slightly. You ever think of leaving? She looked at him, startled. Leave? There's more than one ranch in this world, more than one way to make a life. I've never even ridden farther than the old stage stop. That doesn't mean you couldn't. Delaney stood, brushing straw from her skirt. Her voice dropped. Why would you say that? Because, he said, watching her closely, when you talk, your eyes aren't fixed here, they're somewhere else. She swallowed hard. And if I left, where would I go? He reached for her hand, his fingers rough and warm around hers. Maybe beside someone who wants to build something real. Her breath caught, but she didn't pull away. Orin, she said softly, you've only just met me. I've met enough people to know when I find someone worth staying for. Delaney sat slowly beside him again, her hand still in his. She didn't speak right away. Finally, she whispered, You scare me. He nodded once. You scare me too. Outside, a horse let out a low snort. Inside, hearts steadied in the hush. Neither of them let go. By the end of the week, Orin could walk without leaning on the stall wall. He still moved carefully, but the worst of the fever had passed. Delaney brought him food twice a day, always wrapped in cloth and tucked beneath her apron. She timed her visits between chores when her family was too occupied to question her whereabouts. None of them came near the barn unless they needed a tool or a saddle, and even then they never looked up. One morning, she found Orin standing near the open loft hatch, watching the pasture through the thin veil of dust. Sunlight edged the loose curls of his hair, which had grown longer than the clean-cut crop he'd arrived with. His shoulders were broader than she remembered, though maybe that was just the way he filled the light now. You should be lying down, she said, setting down the cloth bundle. He didn't turn. I needed to see the land again. I hate staying still too long. Delaney sat on the edge of the hay bale and unfolded the cloth, corn fritters still warm and a strip of salted beef. "You're healing slower because you keep pushing," he glanced at her. "And you're always telling me what I already know. I guess someone has to." He took a bite, chewed thoughtfully, then asked, "What's beyond the mesa to the north?" She blinked at the sudden question. "The old Ute hunting ground." "Then some mining shacks that burned last winter." "No towns, not for a good distance. Why, I've been thinking, if I take work driving cattle north this summer, I could pitch camp past the ridge, stay close without drawing attention." Delaney didn't answer right away. She picked at a torn thread in her sleeve. "You wouldn't have to sneak out here anymore," he added. "We could go riding, talk without whispering." She looked toward the barn doors. "You said you had to move on, get back what you lost." "I did. But I've lost more important things before and never turned around. This time I did." Her voice was low. "They won't understand. Your family," she nodded. He walked over and crouched beside her, careful not to strain his side. "They don't have to." "You do. I've never done anything without their approval." "Then maybe it's time." Delaney met his eyes. "What if we try and it doesn't last? You think I rode back here sick and half broke because this was a passing thing?" Her breath caught. "You don't owe me anything." "I'm not offering out of debt," he said. "I'm offering because the thought of riding off without you feels wrong." They sat like that for a long while, the barn quiet but not still. A sparrow darted through the loft, its wings stirring the hay. Delaney reached for his hand, not because she was unsure, but because she wanted to feel the shape of this choice. "I don't know how to build a life that doesn't fit their idea of me." "Then we build one that fits you," he said. "Just you. And I'll fit beside it." Her lips parted, but she didn't speak. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her brow to his. It was the smallest movement, but it held the weight of something irreversible. He didn't move away. Later, as the sun reached its peak, Delaney slipped back to the house, her skirt catching on the fence post as she passed. She didn't notice. That night, she took her riding boots down from the attic, the ones she'd outgrown but never thrown out. She dusted them off, then laid them beside her bed. Orin wasn't leaving, and she wasn't hiding anymore. The first time Orin saddled the mare Delaney brought him, her hands trembled as she passed him the bridle. Not from fear she'd handled horses since childhood, but from the weight of what they were about to do. It wasn't a flight. It wasn't defiance. It was a step toward a life she hadn't dared to imagine until he walked into the creek that night. "You sure she'll carry me steady?" he asked, cinching the girth. "She's older than she looks, but sound. I've ridden her through sleet and thunder." "She won't spook easy." He adjusted the saddlebag with a wince, then straightened slowly. "And you, I won't spook either." They both smiled, but neither laughed. They didn't leave that morning. Orin rode out alone, disappearing behind the ridge with a promise to return in 2 days. Delaney watched him go from the rise near the cottonwood, a bundle of linen and food in her arms, her jaw set against the ache of watching him vanish again. He returned on the second evening exactly as he'd said, a new coat slung behind his saddle, dust on his boots, and a stack of canvas-wrapped supplies tied behind the cantle. "I found an old line cabin past the dry gulch," he said, reining in beside her. "Belongs to a freighter who winters up in Laramie. He's letting me use it through July. Said it's got a stove that still breathes smoke and a roof that don't leak." Delaney brushed her hand along the mare's shoulder. "How'd you convince him?" "Said I was fixing to settle a little." Guess that sounded good enough. The next morning, she woke before anyone else and packed what she needed. She didn't take much: some sewing tools, 3 dresses, her father's old hunting knife, and the journal she'd written in since she was 15. She left a note in the pantry with careful words. Not angry ones, just the truth, that she was going where someone saw her as whole. She met Orin by the creek. He helped her onto the mare, then mounted his own gelding and turned them north. They rode 2 hours before they spoke. "You always write so small in that journal?" he asked, nodding at the leather-bound book tied behind her saddle. "If I didn't, I'd have run out of pages 10 years ago. What do you write about?" "Things I can't say out loud, things I wish I'd said." He glanced at her. You ever write about me? Not yet. I hope when you do, it's honest. I don't know how to be anything else. They reached the cabin by early afternoon. It stood crooked beside a stand of juniper, its door hanging slightly off-center, but the walls held and the stove inside still drew heat. Dust coated everything, but the sun fell through the single window in a warm slant, and the silence felt like permission. Delaney set her bundle down on the cot and looked around. It's more than I ever expected. What did you expect? A tent? Or nothing? Orin shrugged off his coat and hung it over a peg. I've slept under worse roofs. This one'll do fine. She opened one of the canvas bundles and began pulling out the supplies: beans, salt, a sack of flour, and a tin of coffee. You brought more than I thought. I figured you eat more than air. Delaney laughed before she could stop herself, and he looked up, surprised by the sound. That's the first real laugh I've heard from you, he said. Maybe it's the first one I've had. He didn't reply, just stepped close and reached for her hand. She let him take it. You're not what I expected either, she said. How's that? I thought you'd ride off and forget me. I tried, he said. Didn't work. They stood there, fingers twined, the sun warming the floorboards between them. Outside, the wind picked up and stirred the trees, but inside, something steadier held. Tonight, she said, I want to cook something worth remembering. Then I'll chop the wood. Later, as the fire crackled in the stove and the scent of stew filled the cabin, Delaney sat across from Orin at the wooden table. He was watching her, not with hunger or curiosity, but with quiet certainty. The kind of gaze that didn't shift when the light changed. I'm not good at saying things plain, she said, stirring her spoon. You don't have to be. I want to try. He set his spoon down and waited. I didn't think someone could want me without needing something from me, but you don't ask for anything. I see what's already there. Delaney looked down. That's the part I don't understand. You don't have to, just let me keep seeing it. She nodded slowly. Then stay. I intend to. They didn't touch again that night. They didn't need to. When they lay down her on the cot, him on a bedroll near the stove, there was a warmth between them that hadn't needed words or promises. Just two people who had chosen each other in the quiet, and who would wake the next morning knowing nothing had to be said again to make it real. The last snow clung to the north-facing slopes as spring pushed deeper into the land. Buds swelled on the cottonwoods near the creek, and the scent of thawed earth carried on the wind. Orin mended fence posts along the east boundary while Delaney planted early greens in the narrow bed she'd cleared beside the cabin wall. The rhythm of days settled around them, slow, deliberate, the way water wears a path through stone. One morning, as she knelt in the dirt with her sleeves rolled, Orin came up from the south trail, a rolled paper tucked beneath his arm. His shirt was damp with sweat, and one boot heel was scuffed raw from walking the long miles through the foothills. You've been gone since dawn, she said, brushing her hands clean. Something wrong? He handed her the paper without a word. She unrolled it carefully, her fingertips leaving faint smudges on the ink. It was a land claim form, half filled in, the rest blank. I found a man south of the pass near Huafano Creek, he said. He's riding up to Denver next week to file. Says he'll carry mine too if I get it ready. Delaney glanced up. You're filing for this piece. The freighter's not coming back. Said he's already got too much land near Rawlins to worry over this one. Her thumb traced the edge of the page. It's your name on here. I told him I'd be adding someone else's, Orin said, if she was willing. The breeze caught the ends of her hair, lifting them off her shoulders. You're sure? I'm not asking to keep you here, he said. I'm asking to build something that's yours too. If you want it. She folded the paper and held it against her chest. I do. It was not a grand gesture. There were no rings, no formal vows. Just a shared look in the open air and the quiet certainty that they were building something neither of them ever expected to find. That night, she brought out a small wooden box she'd hidden beneath the floorboard of the cabin. Inside were scraps of linen, red thread, and a spool of blue ribbon faded at the edges. She held it out to him. My mother gave me this when I turned 16, she said. Said it was for the day I made my own home. Orin took the ribbon and ran it slowly between his fingers. We'll use it on the window curtain. They worked side by side through the following weeks, clearing brush, digging a well deeper along the draw, and fashioning shelves from scrap pine. Delaney taught Orin how to bake cornbread without burning the crust, and he showed her how to read the slope of the land for runoff. They traded eggs to a sheep herder for wool, and he gave them an old iron kettle in return. One evening they walked the ridge above the cabin, the sky brushed in lavender and gold. Orin carried a small sack over his shoulder. Delaney tilted her head. More supplies. He untied the string and held out the contents, a pair of soft leather gloves stitched neat and small. Trapper I met owed me a favor. I figured you'd need something better than those worn-out work mitts. She slid one on, flexed her fingers. They fit. They should, he said. I traced your hand while you slept. She laughed, not loud, but enough that he grinned and stepped closer. I never thought I'd have this, she said. Not just the land, you. I didn't think anyone like you would let me stay. She touched the edge of his collar, smoothing it flat. You didn't stay, you chose me. That's different. They stood there as the sun settled behind the peaks, the last light touching their faces like a benediction. Later that spring, they rode into La Veta and signed the papers together. Two names, side by side, the ink drying slow in the high-altitude air. The clerk didn't ask questions. He saw the way their hands brushed even when they weren't looking. Some things didn't need explaining. They returned home that evening to the smell of rain in the distance and the sound of the first frogs in the shallows below the cottonwoods. A quilt dried on the line and smoke rose from their stove. Years passed. The cabin grew, one room added, then another. Delaney kept hens behind a split-rail fence, and Orin broke colts for nearby ranchers when the weather allowed. They planted apple trees, and by the fourth autumn, one of them bore fruit. A son came after the first bitter winter, red-faced and loud-voiced, born in the same room where Orin had once lain with fever and grit under his nails. Neighbors came to call, slow at first, then steady. A woman who spun wool brought fabric. A carpenter offered to plane boards for a porch. Delaney never returned to the ranch house she'd left. Her father sent a letter once, terse but not unkind. She read it aloud, then placed it back in the drawer and never mentioned it again. One morning, long after the grass turned gold beyond the pasture and the child had grown strong enough to follow Orin to the fence line, she stood at the window with her hands wrapped around a cup of chicory. Orin came in from the chill, dust on his coat and a new nick on his thumb from the fence wire. He leaned in and kissed her cheek, warm and unhurried. Fence is set, he said. Storm's rolling in from the west. She turned to him, her eyes soft. Then let it come. They closed the door together and the wind curled around the roof, but inside the fire held. The cabin stood firm, and every promise they'd made, spoken and unspoken, had taken root. Nothing grand, nothing easy. Just two people who had built a life with quiet hands and steady hearts, and who had chosen, again and again, to stay.